Well, hello, my friend, Simone Anderson. What's going on, my sister from another mister? I know that you live up in NorCal, further north than I do, and you got fire concerns going on. What's happening with your area?
Well, after your great introduction, I'm just trying to fit my head in this screen. No.
How was that song? How much did you love that song?
Oh, I totally love it. I'm definitely going to download it. And like you said, it's always great to hear music that isn't controlled by the Illuminati. And a lot of people think that's something that's made up, but someone who's actually worked in Hollywood, it exists, and people do serve that system.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. As have I. So I guess that's probably one of the many reasons why I love talking to you because we both kind of come from the same background. But and we've seen it. We know what's there. And at the time, we were part of it. But then it just got more and more apparent to me that nobody else is speaking out, so I have to. But courage, as I said, is contagious. And along comes this guy named Rush Limbaugh, and everybody was, and this was just in Sacramento. That's where I started my career, in Sacramento, California. Rush Limbaugh was on the talk station there in town, and I was on the music station. And I start hearing this stuff about Rush Limbaugh, and immediately they're going, "Oh, he's a racist, he's a chauvinist pig, he's this, he's that," throwing all the labels at him. And then I actually started listening to him, and then I bought his first book. That changed everything, Simone, because it made me realize here's a very great broadcasting professional who is awake and who is telling it like it is, despite the fact that it could destroy his career. And I'm like him. I paid the price. I got fired from jobs for it. But then something clicked, something happened, and next thing I know, he is it for conservative talk radio, despite all the efforts to shut him up and shut him down. He was an inspiration to me. So I started getting emboldened and realizing somebody's got to say something because I know the rest of these pigs that I work with never will because they're cowards for the most part, weak. So, not that I'm all that, believe me, it's all just by the grace of God. I thank the Lord for for emboldening me and my heart to actually share truth as I know it with anybody who's willing to listen or watch. So I know you do that as well. And you've probably had to pay the price also for being bold in your speech.
Well, I've always been a little off the beaten path, so I'm was used to that. So it hasn't really bothered me. A lot of people think that I'm crazy, and I'm just like, okay. And then 5 years later, they asked me to send them the information I tried to tell them about 5 years ago.
It is that window has gotten smaller and smaller to where what is a conspiracy theory now, just give it a couple of months.
Well, you know what they say about conspiracy theories in the truther movement. The truthers have run out of things to say because everything they've been talking about for 20 years has just come true over the last 5 years.
And
And you
now
were
we're
talking
watching
about
it.
truth. My whole life, my grandmother had this magnet on her refrigerator, and it was a proverb, and it says, "He who speaks truth tells what is right." And that just always stuck in my brain. It's not on the refrigerator anymore, but I can still see it in my head when I think about things like that.
The Paris Olympics, which thank God are coming to an end because it was just dismal. I, I've been in a place. I got called up. I serve in the Army State Guard, and I got called up. I got activated to assist with the fires that have been happening, and in our downtime, usually in a break room, you got the TV going. Now, most of us are watching fire results all the time because what I was assisting with, my assigned unit was transportation of the pilots and the crew. But and they're watching the Olympics and they're watching the opening ceremony, and I'm like, this is demonic. This is demonic. They're completely throwing it in the world's faces. Look, here's who we are. Here's what we believe. And if you don't think this way, then you're being left behind. Was the attitude. And now they have since come out and tried to apologize for all of it because it has been a dismal failure ratings wise and so on, because so many others felt the way I did. And thank God, Christians especially are finally starting to boycott, finally starting to put their money where their mouths are, and actually turning off and voting with their wallets. And I'm so grateful for that. But
Well, the last two Super Bowl mid-time shows, one
half
was I
times,
could do a reading if you want. I understand symbology, colors, and numbers, and so
yeah,
I could break down the last two Super Bowls. Three Super Bowls were openly the rise of the Antichrist rituals. And I tried to tell people, I'm like, why are you watching this? Because on one hand, you want change, but on the other hand, you really don't want anything to change. You still want to get your information from the same people. You still want to be involved in professional sports, which is a huge conduit for this kind of activity. The bigger players are put in place to push social agendas. You got one of the top football players in the country right now is always talking about how his wife does rituals and spells before their events. That's why he feels he's winning so big. Tom Brady, who's married to the model. So they're putting it right in front of us, and it's our choice to walk away from it. And we just have to walk away from it. You have to stop watching. A lot of people say, well, what can we do? This is so overpowering. The thing we can do, and the reason that I'm doing a channel and the process that I went through is because first you have to realize what's going on. Then you have to face how you're contributing to it. And you have to start changing it in small ways. You have to stop watching things. You have to stop going to certain companies. And you have to do the same thing that all the lefties have always been doing. We want a lot of change on the more conservative or even libertarian side. We want a lot of change, but people don't literally want to individually change anything they're doing, right? Even to what you're allowing to be put in your mind when you go see a horror film. That's all satanic. That is letting that negative energy inside you. So I think people it all starts here at home. And the only thing we can do is change how we're reacting to what they're giving us. So it starts at home. You can't change, especially immediately, what they're doing. But over time, if we change how we just suck up everything they give us, whether it's satanic, whether it's overly sexual, whether it's sexualizing our children, everybody is just eating it up. Say no. Just say no.
I know, it's weird, isn't it? And I'll throw this in there too. Never forget this. When you sit there and you're all watching this together, you're inviting demons into your home. It's that blatant. It's that real. You are inviting demons into your home. You don't think that that's not going to have a negative impact on you, your family, where you live?
Well,
Man,
when we're watching these rituals, even if we don't know we're watching a ritual, we're participating in the energy it's generating and creating. If you understand the things that these people believe, we're all, and I personally believe some of it, our bodies are basically electrical current. We're an electrical system. They're tapping into our energy and they're harvesting it. And they can block our energy if it's super negative. And that's what they always want us to be in fear. They want us to be negative. They want us to hate our neighbor. They want us to hate someone who's a different color, because this energy churns in whatever our reality is, correct? And so if we can clear our minds and not support this stuff. I mean, every time you turn the TV on, it opens up with someone dead and murdered. I mean, you know how many, I read somewhere that children under 5 has seen over 3,000 murders. And then you wonder why people are rooting on that whether you support Donald Trump or not, this fact that they have a huge part of the population who is openly wishing for the death of someone they don't even know. If you're a Christian, Muslim, or Jewish practicing person, you just committed a sin. You're not supposed to wish the death of someone you know. So again, we all have to start looking inward of what we're doing, of what we're projecting. And I'm not perfect. I've sinned. I've made mistakes. I've supported things that I shouldn't. I've done things that I shouldn't. But the reality is we're all humans. We all have done that. But we have to change our behavior before their behavior changes, because they have our consent. Basically, we're ruled under what they call Roman law. And if they have our consent, if we don't push back, we're giving them our consent. And so that's basically why it's gotten so out of control, because nobody's pushing back anymore and people are afraid of being personally attacked. If you have someone in your family or life that's going to personally attack you for your valid, they're not the person that they project to be, because supposedly they're open to everything, right?
Yeah.
They're open to everything unless it's an opinion or a belief that's different than theirs. And that's where the hypocrisy lies.
I heard my dad one time say, yeah, you can have an open mind, but just don't open it too far. Your brains will fall out.
Good
Uh,
job,
the the
Dad.
fires that I was assigned to assist in are burning, raging. The fourth largest wildfire in the state history of California is up in your area. Are you okay? Is everything okay
Yeah,
there?
everything is good. Our street, we were on a warning for the evacuation, and I was actually evacuated once, but I'm in Southern California right now at the beach. So I'm enjoying that and just checking in with my neighbors. But my neighbor is a heavy construction guy whose company's on contract. He'll be up there at the fires this week. They're still doing the water trucks. And then they have about 2 weeks of cleanup after the fire's over. So it's been kind of unusual because there's been a few fires that started up in that area. And as far as I know, it's not a big fire area. I was evacuated over 4th of July weekend because there was a house on fire, but they got that contained. And then a week or so later, this fire started. And if you've been living in Northern California over the last few years, there comes a point, especially as a native Californian who's lived on and off in Northern California my whole life, we've never had wildfires like this.
No.
So a lot of people realize that if you understand things like Agenda 2030, which CAL FIRE has signed on to, that means they're going to force everybody from the country into the cities because they want us to be completely controlled. I don't know if anyone's aware of Agenda 2030, but their motto is you'll have nothing and be happy. They basically are going to put some kind of tagging inside us where everything is on these different readers that are placed around, and they're placed really close together and basically recording everything we do. I mean, it's even crazy stuff like we won't have our own home anymore. And if you happen, most of people will be telecommuting, but if you happen to go into your office, someone will be in your house sitting at your desk working on your computer. If you want to iron your shirt, you need to call these people and they deliver an iron because you're not even going to have an iron. So this is real stuff. People want to laugh at it, but the same people who closed us down for COVID, the World Economic Forum, Bill Gates, all of the BlackRock guys and the Vanguard guys, all these guys have been talking about this for 30 years. And so part of Agenda 2030 is to get all of the people in the rural area to move into the cities. And of course, that's what's been happening, or at least they're relocating.
They call it their 15-minute smart city, and
Exactly.
it's so enticing, and it'll be so easy. And as Klaus Schwab himself said, "You will own nothing and be happy."
Well,
That's
and
listen to these people. You think that they're just crazy and it can never actually happen. Not in the United States of America. It's going on. It's happening. And she's right. We're being burned out of those. I used to live up in the mountains. The town where I lived in, little old Grizzly Flats in El Dorado County, has been leveled with the Caldor fire. I had friends who had their homeowners insurance canceled on them because it's become so expensive in California. They're leaving. Big companies like State Farm, farmers, so on, leaving the state of California. I had people who lost everything. Good, close friends, people at my church lost everything in that fire. Same thing happened in Paradise. I didn't think there was anything left to burn up in your area. Redding,
well,
Chico, Red Bluff.
in Paradise, they built the fire camp the month before the fire started. Have you ever seen that reporting? They built the fire camp the month before the fire started. And if you live where I live in Northern California, if you're familiar, my grandmother was a shareholder of PG&E, so I oversaw some of the stuff in her trust. So I would read the documents. And in about 2010, they've been having what they call a direct energy. They basically had put these, like, I don't know how to technically explain it, but solar panels in the sky. So they were absorbing energy and they were going to be beaming it back to our power stations. Okay. So they tested that. And then the year they moved it over, it used to be out in Nevada and the Arizona area. And so they were testing it in that area. But in 2010, they moved it over Northern California. And we've had all these fires since. And anyone, you can go on and you can look at the Hawaii fire. You can see the beams coming out of the sky. The University of Hawaii caught it. You could see the beams coming out right before the Redding fire. And of course, everyone knew the day it happened that it started at the PG&E plant, but they took 2 years for the Shasta County to decide that it was PG&E's fault. But of course, PG&E had already declared bankruptcy. And now the taxpayers of California are on the hook to help all these people. So once again, a major corporation. And who's the major corporation controlled by? The Rothschilds. So it's just a vicious cycle. These people have a plan to reduce the world's population to 500 million. I'm sure you've covered the Georgia Guidestones before, where they literally put up a monument that said they were going to cull the herd to 500 million people. And because
that's right.
If you understand scripture and you understand the fallen or the aliens or whatever you want to call them, apparently there was 500 million. And so they need to possess human bodies in order to exist because they were wiped out in the flood and they're more spiritual beings. So basically their plan is to kill off humanity, and they need the body. They need 500,000 because that's how many there are of them. And then they will use our bodies because they're planning on doing where they put the chip in your head and you become a computer, like almost a robot. So we will never die. And I believe in the Bible, it says people will want to die, but they will be unable to. And I believe this has to do with the coming transhumanism movement. I've done several podcasts on that. That's something different today. But all of this is the same people who are planning on making us all into robots and killing 7 billion of us are the same ones in charge of the fires and the companies that are causing the fires in California.
Sounds like the Borg.
Well, in all those movies are like, I've started watching the Arnold Schwarzenegger movies. You know, a lot of people don't realize, I always wasn't sure who Arnold Schwarzenegger was. I couldn't believe that he just married a Kennedy and he wasn't anybody. Right. So one time I delved into his, and he comes from a very high level Nazi family, like many of the people in Hollywood. And these are the plans that these people have had for a long time. And movies like Terminator, and he did a bunch of other kind of like B kind of futuristic movies in the 80s and 90s. And that's all really based on what their plan for the future is. Or I don't know if you've ever seen the Project Looking Glass, where they say they can look into the future. And he always says in that movie, I mean, I know Project Looking Glass exists because I had friends who were working on the military in the 60s. And they made that movie Deja Vu with Denzel Washington. Do you remember that one? Mm-hmm. Where that was, they tell you about 20 years after they actually have the technology, they put it into a movie, because Hollywood is run by the military industrial complex and the government.
You think so?
Yes.
Okay.
I worked in the movie industry for quite some time. I know that it's heavily involved in the CIA. I can see by their imagery on the different things that they do. The Illuminati is part of the CIA, or the CIA is part of the Illuminati. You go to Burbank and any of those cities, you go right next to Paramount is McDonnell Douglas, right? So actually the movie industry was started with money from the Rothschilds, who financed Mayor MGM,
Metro Goldwyn
Mayer. He financed and sent them from Europe to start the movie studios. So it was to create the new age that we live in today, using the new medium of movies and television.
Very powerful medium of movies, and of course radio and television as well. Extremely powerful.
Well, you can see the decline of society since TV came out. And I mean, I'm not like a Puritan or anything. I enjoy watching different shows, but this was the long-term goal of these New World Order people. They think in 1,000 years, and we have a hard time concentrating for 5 minutes. So this is really what we're facing.
Let's talk about couple things on your mind. I know one was about Kamala Harris. I posted something just recently, and I'm listening to all these conservative talk show hosts and so on the radio a lot, and they're all about well, it's not even fair. There wasn't even a vote. They didn't take it to the people. How come suddenly she's the it hasn't they haven't even had their convention, but yet she's the chosen one. How did that happen? There's so much more to it than that, and I don't think they're really exploring or putting any kind of thought process into this, because it's so apparent to me, especially with her choice for vice president now, who's one of the most radical pieces of crap to ever walk the earth. Governor Tim Walz is a bad man. He's just a freaking bad man. Kamala Harris is a bad man too, and
Well,
together
they're really delving into the reasons they're saying that, and that's
there's
what I'm
well
interested in you
here's
to
my
dig.
thought. Here's my thought. Um, Trump screwed up their plans. Trump uh, put them back at least 4 years. They were not counting on that. We're not expecting it, and definitely it stalled their plans. Because you're right, they always give these names to these different plans with the year that it's going to go into effect fully, like the 2030, the 2035, the Georgia Guidestones. They say this is the year it's all going to go into place, and we're going to make it happen, and it's happening right now, whether you like it or not. So by choosing two of the most radically left candidates, and they're chosen,
Of course.
um, that just tells me that the Democrat Party is so completely arrogantly confident that they're going to be able to cheat again. And a lot of that's because the Republicans have shied away from even talking about it. My own elected representatives are disappointing the hell out of me. Nobody talks about election fraud. And then they turn around and go, but we got a chance this time. Really? What's changed? What have you done to make sure that that doesn't happen again? Because it obviously happened. You have one man, Mike Lindell, put his fortune on the line. It's now being heard by the Supreme Court. Did you know that? The evidence is now being seen and heard by the Supreme Court. No ruling on it yet. What are they going to do when it's done? Doesn't matter. Biden's already said he's not going to run for re-election anyway. Kamala Harris allegedly is not even eligible to run for president, according to our own Constitution, because of where she was born, who her parents are, growing up in Canada. Can't be a president, but yet she's running for president. Nobody's fricking saying a thing about it. And that's because they have to really accelerate their plans by getting very, very on the left people in a position of power who's going to hit the ground running immediately. They're so confident that they're going to win again because of fraud, because of election, because of cheating, that they put two of the most radically left people running for the most powerful positions in the land. And that's that.
Well, I'm going to go into Kamala Harris in detail, but all this craziness, they're talking about race. I mean, we're literally on the verge of war with several countries, and they're talking about what race she is, all this craziness. And even with Walz, they're going on about his military thing. Well, Walz, when he was as governor, he's the one who oversaw all the Minnesota riots. During COVID, he allowed all this kind of theft from all the money, which a lot of Democratic states did, where the money was just being stolen.
Yep.
So he allowed this Somali group to steal $250 million and send it back to Somalia that was supposed to be for child food aid. I mean, I don't know what they're feeding these kids, but why one group would get $250 million, a group of foreign nationals. And Somali's been in civil war and unrest. The girl who's in Congress, Omar, whatever her name, her father was the head of Somali intelligence, right? So that money's going to murder people overseas. But then the other thing he did to show how allegiant he was to this left group, he changed his state's flag to look like the Somali flag. It used to have a pioneer tilling a field on a horse and an Indian on a horse. And now they've changed it to a solid green flag. The star doesn't look the same, but it's got a star. And that's what the Somalia flag looks like. So I'd be delving in. I personally believe he was nominated. I'm not so sure they're going to win. I do watch this one guy who has some really inside contacts, and he was on vacation yesterday, and he came on and he said the Dominion system has been taken down. So I'm not sure if that's true. I don't have any way to verify it. But with Kamala Harris, you're saying, why is she in this place? Who is she? And when Biden came to office and when Kamala came to office, I started researching. The goal of the kind of research and writing I do is to explore history so we can understand what's happening to mankind today. And I believe that Kamala Harris benefited from the Trump assassination attempt because everyone knew it was probably Biden. The plan was so boggled, it could only be made by somebody mentally incompetent. I mean, so I've been looking at the history of who Kamala Harris is and why she's been moved up through the system, because her parents were avid communists, one at Stanford and one at Berkeley. They hated the United States.
Yeah.
But I wanted to go into who her family is, because none of us can blame, if you had somebody bad in your family 100 years ago, you can't really blame the person today.
Right.
But a lot of times the people in power, from Nancy Pelosi's family, her father was a mafia boss who ran Baltimore. He was investigated for killing Kennedy. He was one of his cabinet members. The Trump assassination was obviously an inside job. But so my focus is to see who was benefiting. So I really kind of delved into Kamala Harris. And I first started to look into her Indian side of the family, because that's who she's always identified with. And I believe her mother still speaks to her. Her father disowned her years ago for some of the same stuff she's getting backlash on right now. He believed she was disrespecting the Jamaican people, and he considers himself Hindu and Irish. He does not consider himself Black, according to his own.
And he certainly doesn't look it.
I don't really care.
He looks white.
Well, right. And so do a lot of people who were, generationally, they were probably originally there was, but like people don't realize the East Indians went out and explored the world too. There was East Indians in Jamaica. There's some countries off around Hawaii that have a large East Indian population. So you just don't hear about it very much, but the Indian people traveled and explored and migrated just like a lot of other people. So with Kamala Harris's mother, I decided to go and start to look, okay, who is it? Her great-great-great-grandfather assassinated Gandhi. His name was Notorious Godse, all right? Her family is from one of the oldest, most infamous assassination and murder families in the history of the world. Have you ever heard of the Thuggee Society? Where the word thug comes from? Well, They were a Hindu cult, and there's some debate because there was some Sikhs and some Muslims involved, but they were predominantly a Hindu cult. And she's named after Kamala Devi, which is a demonic entity with 3 eyes, snakes in her hair, and 4 arms, who's frequently pictured. She's like a Jezebel image in the Hindu religion, and she's always got her foot on the head, the skull, or the body of a dead human. So basically her demonic entity is the destruction of man. So if you go back in her family tree, she comes from this line of assassins, which literally went in, is less than 100 years old to be taken out. And I believe they still secretly practice, right? For instance, they used to kill everybody. They would get on the road with travelers, pretend to be their friends, find out where they were going, how long they were going to be on the road, and then they would massively murder them, like sometimes 100 and 200 people at a time. And the British put an end to this, but personally, I think the British dark forces just adapted a lot of their stuff, and actually the Thuggee Society still exists under a different name today. But what you can see is that generationally, for hundreds of years, her family was part of this assassin. They murdered over 2 million people, 40,000 people a year. So that's her mom's family. Then you go over to her dad's family, and he was the founder. He was an Irish slave owner, a very vicious slave owner. And he started the town of Brownsville, Jamaica. So if anybody, and not only her family, But Joe Biden's family was receiving compensation from the British taxpayers until 2015 because they lost their slaves. So if anyone wants to sue for reparations, you should sue the Biden family, the Harris family, the Bush family. The Republicans aren't innocent either. Barack Obama, because their families had been receiving money from the British government from the time of slavery ended to 2015. And you can look at the Irish Times and the Guardian. They both did in-depth reportings on this, because obviously people in England were pretty upset that for 200 years they've been paying the slave owners and not the people who were enslaved. Completely insane. And so on that note, have you ever wondered why Joe Biden seems to think he's got this great affinity with Black people, but when you see him with Black people, he's so uncomfortable. He says weird things. So do you know why that might be true? Why he feels he's got this affinity? Well, his family,
because he's an arrogant ass. I mean, that'd be
worse. His family was one of the founding members of the transatlantic slave trade back in Ireland and Scotland. It was originally called the Royal African Company and originally became the British and West and East India Company. And you can go look up and see that they always say, oh, they were sea merchants. Well, you look up what they were sea merchanting, slaves. And they had a huge slave colony in Madras, India. So all of these things kind of come together. And then we've got Ramaswamy, right? Okay, in the 1700s, his family's been intermarrying they changed their name from Godse 5 years before back to Gopalan, that had been their family name a few hundred years before. So Ramaswamy family has married into the Kamala Harris family. And what you understand from these assassin families, from these Thuggee families, is that they're born into it. From the time they're 11, they're allowed to watch the kill. And then when they're 18, they're allowed to make their first kills. And the women are assassins too. So that's the heritage that this peace-loving, communist, giggling. And you know how she's always giggling for some unknown reason? If you believe in what the Hindus believe in, she's literally possessed by the namesake demon. So it's a laughing demon. And it's got its red tongue out. I don't know if you know that symbology. But so anyone who understands this believes it's not Kamala laughing, it's the demon inside her. So whether you kind of believe that stuff or not, but it kind of is a crazy explanation of all that giggling that goes on for no reason after almost every comment. I mean, I've always been a giggler, but I don't think I'd be doing it if I was the vice president answering questions to the president.
Like a new Batman villain, the giggler.
Yeah, exactly.
What is a couple other things that you and I have been back and forth about that I want to hear more, and that's the Operation Phoenix, Operation Chaos, Project Pandora. What are those?
Okay, so this all kind of wraps into the assassination teams. Okay, Project Phoenix was organized in the 1930s. After the Federal Reserve banking system took our country over and put us into the birth certificate, where they literally own our birth certificates and trade us like stock.
Which you and I talked about the first time you were on, the reason why our names are in all capital letters.
That's right.
On the birth certificate. There's a reason for that.
Well, in our country, since that time, it took a while for them to get us off the gold standard where they had complete control. But in the 1930s, you'll see everything from the Tuskegee experiments, where they were giving all Black men syphilis for 50 years and not telling them, and seeing how they would go insane, stuff like that. That all started in that 1930s period where we had all these dark programs. So Project Phoenix was an assassination program that was an internal assassination program to get rid of anybody who was opposing the secret society of the banking system and to keep the banking system in place. Like a lot of people don't understand, the Secret Service was never intended to protect the president. The Secret Service was put in place after the Civil War. They went around collecting everyone's gold and silver and telling them it was counterfeit and making them take paper money that they didn't want to take, right? Because they all knew the paper money, the fiat currency system, but they promised them, oh, you're going to be able to go to the bank anytime you want and get your gold. This is just easier. We'll keep the gold safe for you. Well, of course, when people started going to the bank in the 1920s, they'd stolen all the gold and people couldn't get their gold. And that's what caused the collapse. What led us in, our government didn't have anything left to pledge because these bankers had already stolen all of our gold. So they pledged our birth certificates. So since that time, we've been in what was known as the Roman birth certificate system that left the Romans in power for a long time because they would basically indebt us and tax us to death so they had control, and they would destroy societies just like we're seeing in our society today where people can't afford to buy food because they give over half their money to the government who sends it to people in other countries to overthrow our government. Yeah, very confusing.
I've been baffled, and the more I learn about how much money we give to other nations without any explanation why, it's not like they're struggling or having a hard time. Why are we doing this?
Because we're doing it to keep power over them. We're loaning them money. Really, there's a loan somewhere involved. And for instance, when Planned Parenthood came into operation after World War II, our government would go to these poor, starving countries and say, look, we'll give you money for food because your people are dying, but you have to let us give abortions. So food aid from the United States for the last 75 years have been tied to and forcibly putting in Planned Parenthood, whether you're for it or against it. So they're either going to kill them by starving them to death, or they're going to feed them so they can abort their children. So these things have been going on for a long time. Our government is involved in very dark things. And one of the reasons they give so much foreign aid is because they're stealing it themselves. I worked in Switzerland. I actually was working, I was a citizen ambassador for the US State Department for the mining industry in the late 80s. I traveled 11 time zones in Russia. And after my government watched me for about a year, they approached me. So the FBI, foreign corruption, I saw my FBI file. It's like that thick. They approached us and told us that the people that we were dealing with were stealing the aid within 72 hours, and it was going to Switzerland. And actually, I'd been on trips to Switzerland with some of these high-level government officials. I didn't know what they were doing, but and basically who I would see on the airplane was Cranston. He was our senator then. And a lot of the Democratic people that were giving the aid were all over there. They were going over there so they could divvy it up. I think one time I read this Scandinavian report about, and it accumulated all the money we'd given to the African countries for wells, just for wells. They couldn't identify one well in the whole of Africa that this charity had supposedly built. And I worked in fund managers, and a lot of British and Scottish people are managing money in Switzerland. And they would tell me, look, you think that boat of food got to Cambodia? They go, we traded it 5 times on its way over to Cambodia. And now it's going to Saudi Arabia and they're going to buy it at a discount. Or I'm just throwing those names out. I don't know any particular.
Funny because I haven't seen any follow-up reports on all these millions and millions of dollars in aid that President Biden has insisted we give to Hamas.
Well, right. And the whole Hamas thing, we could spend all day going back in the history of what's really going on in those two countries. And it goes way back. And the reason they're giving it to Hamas is, again, they're also stealing it. All the leaders of Hamas live in the next country and are billionaires. And they're just letting the poor people get wiped out and killed. They don't care about them. They don't care. They're just fodder. Because they keep getting... If we stopped giving both of those countries money, I think the war would end pretty soon. And this, like I was saying, this system, they finance both sides of the war and they take the spoils and they don't care how many people they kill. And you can really, if you want to, you can go research documents.
Because they're all on board with the depopulation thing. They're all on board with the depopulation thing. No better way to take out hundreds of thousands or even millions of people than with war, especially if you can turn it into a nuclear war. They don't care. They really believe that they need to winnow down the population of the planet to less than 1 billion people on it. More like half a billion, 500 million.
Well,
That's
I
it.
told you, they say 500,000,000, and this is a number that Bill Gates throws out. And for anyone who's watching, they can go look up the Georgia Guidestones. It has an all. Well, it's been torn down. Some lightning hit it about a year and a half ago, and then they bulldozed it in the middle of the night, and now it's just like gone. You can't find out what. They didn't know who built it. They didn't know who maintained, according to the Georgia government. They
Who
didn't know who
financed
maintained
it? Who was maintaining it? Yeah, that's right.
They
Who's
didn't
keeping
know
this
who
up?
got the street named after it, and now they don't know who tore it down and who did the cleanup.
There's
So
dirty stuff in the state of Georgia, man. There's dirty
it's
stuff in that
crazy.
state,
Well,
especially in the elections.
I wanted to get back to Kamala Harris real quick.
Yeah, yeah, please.
She's in related to the Thuggee Society, how her ancestor assassinated Gandhi on behalf of the British, the CIA, and the French. So the style of murder they did, these people were very fastidious murderers. And something to do with their religion, they didn't believe in the shedding of blood. So they would meticulously strangle people and kind of arrange them. Sometimes they hide them, depending on where it was. But they used a scarf. And I don't know if you're familiar with any of these murders, from Anthony Bourdain to Kate Spade, the purse designer. They were all found hanging from a doorknob in their house with the red scarf. So just recently, I don't know if you're familiar with Kamala Harris. He was divorced from his first marriage because he impregnated the nanny and the teacher at his children's school. So apparently there's this other actress that recently died about 2 weeks ago, and she was found hanging from a red scarf from her doorknob. She'd worked on the Biden campaign, and it's implied that she was in an intimate relationship with Harris's husband. So that's just a little bit of intrigue there. I'm not sure how that story is going to turn out, but there's been a lot of assassination attempts. And like you were saying, Project Phoenix, Project Condor, those are all internal projects. Project Phoenix had a web that infiltrated all Black organizations and universities to subjugate the Blacks and put in power the people we see today, like P. Diddy and all this. Not the educated, not the God-fearing, to put in the group of people like P. Diddy that we've just seen in office today, in power today, and being someone who's looked up to by the general population. So all of these things, Malcolm X was not a liberal. Malcolm X had a quote that said, "Scratch a liberal, find a fascist." And they had to get rid of him, because he would not consent to their system of what they call the crab barrel system.
He was also
where we're all
very vocal about how wicked the media.
Who was? Excuse me?
He was also very vocal about how wicked the media is.
Well, because he
Malcolm
understood,
X.
and he was exposing to the Black community what was really going on behind the scenes. And they couldn't have that because the people they had in place, like, I don't know if anyone's ever looked at Michelle and Barack Obama. They're huge abortion proponents. They constantly say how wonderful Margaret Sanger is. Margaret Sanger started Planned Parenthood with the goal of killing all Black people and Asian people because they considered them animals. So why would Barack Obama, they've turned their own people against them. They put the people that turned against their own people in high power. And as we can see, Kamala worked against her own group. Obama worked against her own group. And this is just a theory. I think that, hopefully you have a leader that wants all groups to be in power. But the reason they put those people in power, because every few years they give us a little something like, oh, we have a chance to get out of the system. So for Black people, they needed to get Obama in, and he was educated by the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia.
And I think a lot of us A lot of us are feeling in that now. We're thinking this is our reprieve if we can just get Trump back in as president and get him from 45 to 47. Everything will be okay, and he'll take down the deep state, and he'll finally be able to clean house and make things right again. And I listen to this guy David. I forget his last name, or maybe that is his last name. Anyway, X22 report.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
I,
Hmm.
I like him. He's entertaining. Does good shows. Obviously, he does a lot of research. But the whole thing, to me, most of the time, I'm like going, "That sounds good," and I hope it's true. But really,
Well, and
um,
I think too is Trump is one person. And again, we've seen the way our society went really to the left. Now we're swinging it back. This is just the way societies throughout history have gone. We go one way and we pull back another way. But Trump. I've had my issues with Trump. I don't like the way he did the vaccination.
no, me
There's a
neither.
few things I don't like.
Me
He
neither. And
spent more money than Obama when he was in office.
I've always said, if there's two things, if I ever get to interview him, two things I guarantee you I will ask. One is about that. Why did you push that, especially after you realized this was a mistake? Why have you never gone back and said, you know what? I was too hasty on that. I'm sorry. And the other question would be, why did you let Hillary Clinton off the hook when I was one of those people at one of your rallies chanting, lock her up? Because I know how dirty that Clinton family is and what they did with their Clinton Foundation. Millions of people, millions of dollars, and hundreds of thousands of people and lives lost. Those pigs need to pay for their crimes. And he knows what they've done. He knows where the skeletons are. But when it came time, when somebody asked him after he was elected, so are you going to go after Hillary? What was his response? Well, they're basically good people. I don't want to do anything to really harm.
Well, if you
Dude.
two of the people who died with the scarves, Anthony Bourdain, the chef, remember the chef guy who was coming out against the pedophiles in Hollywood?
Yep.
He was calling out the Clintons for child trafficking out of Haiti and for stealing all the money they raised. That's what he was talking about. And Kate Spade was involved in Haiti too. So you can really start connecting a lot of these assassinations. So one of the things is I'm not of the theory that a lot of these people haven't been taken down, because they have. And what Trump did, why they hate him so much, is he took a lot of power from the CIA, which runs the New World Order system in the United States. And I believe a lot of people, like the oldest Rothschild's dead. So is his 51-year-old son. They took his bank private. They were auctioning off all the stuff they sold from the French family through different, just because someone isn't in the public eye. If you remember, the Secret Service is with the president for the rest of their lives.
Right.
So
Yeah.
they don't have to be in a jail somewhere. They can just march him out. And if you can tell by Obama's body language, Hillary's body language, I believe a lot of these people have been taken down. And that's because I've listened to a lot of military briefings, particularly a briefing before Joe Biden came into office. And it was like 100 generals from countries from all over the world with some of our military. And they said they had just completed the most complex, technically difficult, and largest military event in the history of the militaries. And they were thanking all of the other countries for their assistance.
So you're one of those people who think that they're no longer on this planet.
Well, I think they could still be stuck around for
No,
purposes,
they're
right?
in Gitmo.
Yeah, they could. Well, Gitmo was only for foreign hostiles, but because these people serve the Vatican system, the British system of the City of London, they may be considered British nationals. I'm not. When it gets into that technical legal stuff,
But the
I'm
point
not.
is, you're saying that's not really Biden. That's not really Hillary. That's not
Oh, well,
really.
no, that hasn't been Biden in a long time. I mean, you can go, his eyes were blue and then they were brown. His ears were here, then they were here. There's literally ones where you can show people that have done close ups and you can see the mask that he's wearing. So they've used
Peel it
body
up a little
doubles.
bit behind. Yeah,
They've used body doubles for a long time.
Sure.
A lot of people, movie stars even have them. Do you think they really have time to go to all those award dinners
Saddam
while they're filming a
Hussein
movie?
bragged about all the body doubles he had running around in Iraq. He was because a lot of people wanted to take him out, especially in the Muslim world because he wasn't complying with the Sharia law. But what about this assassination attempt? I was actually at the Trump Hotel in Las Vegas, there for the Freedom Fest that night that it happened. I'm watching it on one of his televisions
Okay,
in
that's
this hotel.
awesome. I mean, you're
I
always
was
going to remember that too.
I will never forget
Not
it.
Austin who
And
got assassinated, but
and
that
I
you.
went live on Facebook right away, and I'm just holding the phone up, and I'm like going, if you're not seeing this, this is happening right now. This is real time,
Well,
and the whole story of what happened after that is I'll share it with you sometime. But the simple fact, the enormity of what had just happened. Now we had already had people ramping up that kind of talk and especially on the left, and I'm like, somebody's going to do it there. This is a talk about dog whistle. The left always love to talk about the dog whistles. They're the masters of it, and they succeeded with this 20-year-old little piece of crap who outsmarted the Secret Service. I don't think so. We have a Secret Service director who has since stepped down. Cheadle, what a disaster, a DEI disaster, who tried to single-handedly ruin one of the greatest law enforcement forces in our nation with a long history of extraordinary service. It's been destroyed, all but destroyed, just like the FBI and so many others in the Department of Justice and the DOD too, unfortunately.
well, the Secret Service was put in place to protect the financial system. Trump wants to do a gold-backed currency. Trump
Yes, he
wants
did.
to use Bitcoin. So he is against the system they're trying to implement. Biden put in an executive order to try to get the banks to do the currency that's a fiat digital currency like they've got in China. Basically, there's nothing backing it, and they can control you completely. If you don't like what you're saying, they just take your money, like they did in Canada to the truck drivers. But I've got some interesting details on the assassination. First of all, you were just mentioning Cheney. Well, remember how that company, Austin LLC, I think it was, they did that big short the day before on the Donald J. Trump stock.
Right.
They would have stand to lose. I watched one guy 650 million to $1 billion they would have made if that stock bet would have worked out. So that Austin LLC is run by a group, a couple called the Krause family, but the people who really own it are George Bush Sr. and the Cheneys. And Cheadle is connected. Cheadle was the Cheney personal bodyguard for some time. And she owns stock in that Austin LLC along with the other lady, Jolene. I don't know if you saw the woman have you seen that clip where there's a woman sitting behind Trump? And when the
With the
shooting
phone,
starts, she just
with the
sits
phone,
there and continues.
taping it. Yeah.
Yes.
And
Okay.
it was almost like at one point she moved the phone to where I know the snipers were up on that one roof. And it was like a nod. And then the phone
Well,
went back. And then when the shooting started, she just sat there. And then
and
when
she
she
didn't
finally thought,
move.
oh,
She didn't get
I guess I
scared.
better get down and act like I'm trying to hide, she never stopped taping any of it. I haven't seen any of that footage. I don't know what she was taping other than the president himself. She wanted to have that footage of him dying,
Right.
having his brain shot out. Apparently, that's what she really wanted. She was
Well,
not
and
concerned for her life because she knew she was not a target.
she'd been in Iran. She'd been in the FBI. She'd been in Iraq and Afghanistan doing some dark deeds herself. She's also connected to the Austin and another company called the McQuary Group, which Kamala Harris's husband, the Bidens, they all own. And this is one of the, I believe that Iran, possibly, and even the government saying Iran had something to do with the assassination because Kamala Harris's husband, the Bidens, and the head of the secret intelligence services of Iran all are partners in a company called the McQuary Group in Sydney, Australia. And they are they're illegally trading with all the countries we have embargoes with. So if they can lift those embargoes, they've cut off all of the U.S. supplies, set the U.S. energy sector way back, and they can make billions and billions of dollars we used to get 40% of our oil from Iran for the United States, and then Europe got 75%, but they cut it off and they created all this strain, and now they're literally trading offshore through the McQuary Group. So I think that could be something that people may know about, and could be something that could definitely be used against Kamala Harris in the election
It would have
coming
been
up.
a great success for them if they could have if they would have been able to murder my president. It would have been a field day and a celebration for all on the left. These demonic, wicked people. They would have taken out this threat because you're right. President Trump wants to fix our money system. He wants to get it back to something that reasonable and solid, and something that we have more control as we, the people, of our own money than they have control over us. Simone is absolutely right what she's saying. Think about the other things that would have, if he would have been successfully murdered, all the other things that they would have accomplished. The whole thing with the Secret Service would have never even been talked about. It would have been quickly covered up because the whole nation would have been in upset and mourning, right?
Well, people have cameras now, so they're just not getting away because they've been lying. But other people can just post. Some people made the mistake of sending their videos to the FBI. I personally would be scared if you understand what happened to the people who contested. Remember the shooting at that concert a few years ago from the
in Las Vegas.
in Las Vegas? I actually knew 3 people, 2 who were shot and 1 died. I went to high school with one of the people who died.
Wow.
And I had 2 friends from Orange County that had gone out for the weekend to see the concert. When summer's over in Southern California, about the end of September, everybody kind of heads to Vegas. It's just kind of a thing. So there was a lot of people from Vegas there. And there were about 10 people under 30 who died after that, because they were saying there was more
after that. After that.
Yes. The people,
not at the concert.
After the concert, the people who were going against what the government was saying and saying there was multiple shooters. And what you find out is this is right before the Saudi royal family. Donald Trump went to visit the Saudi royal family. They were heavily involved in robbing their people blind. But they were also, the crown prince himself was heavily involved in adrenochrome, right? He had a whole prison camp there of about 3,000 Africans. He was starving to death because he was an adrenochrome addict. I don't know if you people, if your viewers understand that, but it's a brain chemical extracted. They first torture the people, and it's a drug, and they extract it from their pineal gland. And I mean, it's nothing new. You can see it in movies. Even the Microsoft operating system, we call it Chrome. The full name is adrenochrome. You can see on the Microsoft symbol, it's 666, right? So these people are, even though it seems like these things are unconnected, there's this group of power people in the country, not the 609 billion of us, but the several million group of people that's really controlling our destiny. And as long as we don't confront it, they're going to continue to do it, because that's what they do. They believe they descend from the Nephilim, which is the child of every story in history. Every culture has the story of the fallen angels, whether
The
it's
fallen angels, yeah.
Right. And they made it
before the flood, during the time of the Noah.
Okay, so I had some really interesting stuff about Crooks. Okay, first of all, Crooks.
Oh, you're talking about the shooter,
the Crooks. Okay,
that 20-year-old little piece
Donald
of
Trump had been denied sniper coverage at all of his different events until this one, which is highly unusual. All of a sudden, they approved it. Crooks, they could see from the pings on the building that he was in contact with Iran, Iraq, Britain, Germany, and North Korea. So most people don't think it was him. They think it was the other people that were the actual assassins. He was the patsy. But what you kind of wonder is, I was telling you, one of the reasons I introduced the Kamala story about her family and the Thuggee society is because these assassination societies, like I said, they're generational. You're born into the family business. So if you want to look at the 3 people who were in charge of protecting Lincoln, The third guy is named William Crooks. And he was paid off to not be the same situation that we have. They were paid off not to protect him by the Knights of the Golden Circle. So
Knights of the Golden Circle. What is that? Is that like the Templar? Knights of Templar?
Yes, there's all these different cults and groups that some are assassins, some are put in place to act like they're good, like they balance the good and evil thing. So one person can be a really good person, but they'll do something extremely evil. It's kind of their system of belief system. They do, like, you'll see some of these people like the Rothschilds who financed 200 million deaths in the last century. And then they'll build a library, right? So you'll see these wicked people that are often doing, if you look up Joe Biden's slave trading family, they were major philanthropists. But they because I imagine they had guilt about what they were doing, and they wanted people to like them because they were giving money. You always have to look at Bill and Melinda Gates. A lot of people don't remember the reason he put all of his money in a foundation is because he was found guilty of so many antitrust laws in the 90s. I don't know if anyone remembers, it's like people have no memory.
I do remember that.
Was sued for all of the illegal stuff they'd done. And he got massively fined. And then all of a sudden he became a humanitarian and now he's going to save the world. And his dad, who was one of the founders of Planned Parenthood with Margaret Sanger, who vowed to wipe the black race off the planet, spent the last years of his life vaccinating people in Africa to help preserve the African culture. So I mean, these people are like completely insane. So you just have to call their bluff and quit worshiping people just because they have money. That money was probably stolen from you and your ancestors. So
exactly right. That's so true.
Right?
Holy cow. Oh, Lord, help us. And we're such suckers. One of the most beloved villains in Illinois was Al Capone, who was just a wicked, freaky piece of walking cat crap. But everybody loved him because he built orphanages. Well, most of those children were probably orphans because of him. Well, but they loved him. They loved Al Capone because he built orphanages.
They always do things in orphanages because a lot of them are pedophiles. And because where do you get the women that work in all your brothels and all that? Today, most of the women in porn came out of the U.S. foster system. Again, where is the biggest porn industry located? Right next to the military industrial complex and the movie studios where all the pornography is made. Right. And most of those people came out of our foster system. So once you start looking into things, you just look at everything completely different. Like Hillary Clinton, the reason she would give people, she wanted children in those systems because of the things they were involved in. So she was giving bonuses to the people in Arkansas to take people away from their children and put them in the foster care system so they could place them with pedophiles.
And that was the beginning of the end of CPS doing anything good and noble.
Well, and really, I mean, there is a place for this. There is a place for CPS, but CPS people shouldn't be rewarded for taking more children. And a lot of people don't understand. Like, they think, oh, Hillary Clinton and Obama's wife, that they're just on the backs of their husbands or whatever. Well, when Hillary Clinton and they were in power in Arkansas, they were paying the prisoners $5 each to extract blood donations. And then they were not testing the blood because Michelle Obama I have no idea why she was qualified to be on some hospital boards. I think she was paying hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to sit on the boards of these hospitals. And they were sending all of the untested blood over to the African countries, tuberculosis, AIDS, smallpox, all this stuff. And I was living over in Europe at the time. I don't know if this was related. I've never been able to connect it. But there was a big German blood company that got in trouble because they weren't testing their blood. And all these people in certain groups in Germany got infected with the infected blood. So there's just so many different connections once you start looking into this people. And it's really a mass crime syndicate meant to rob us blind, to take our children, and to basically then extinguish us. I mean, it's crazy when you think about it, but these people have long written documents that explore all of these ideas. So one of the things that I wanted to get back to with the Crooks building and the assassination is that that building since the 1920s has been controlled by the intelligence agencies. And you know who owns it now? The building that Trump was shot from?
No.
Vanguard. And who owns Vanguard? BlackRock. Right?
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So I've got a lot of different notes. I know our show's getting long and we've really jumped around, but there's so many different connections. And with I mean, why is Cheadle and that other lady, Jolene, I can't remember the one that you saw with the camera, why did they have stock in Austin LLC? Why are they members of the McQuary Group that's trading against our embargoes in Australia with the head of the Iran secret intelligence, who's another shareholder? So I was kind of, when he started saying Iran, I wanted to look at it, and that opened up a whole can of worms.
Yeah.
But as you can see, everybody knows it's an inside job. And what I just saw today, they just released one of the reasons they had to take Joe Biden out is because they're moving forward to charge Hunter Biden this week as a foreign unregistered agent. So this is going to be big. This is what's really going to open up.
It's about time. I was quite convinced that he was hanging in there all the way to the end because he wanted to be able to pardon his piece of trash son, but also because he wanted them to take him out with the 25th Amendment, because then he could use that as a defense to when he's brought to justice,
right,
when they go to stand him up for trial. It was that whole thing that just happened not too long ago with that one report. Well, he's old and confused, then has a befuddled memory, so we can't really bring charges against him.
I don't believe he's old and confused. I think maybe the actor they have playing him, who keeps telling stories that have nothing to do with his life, also has dementia. I mean, you've heard the story of the Las Vegas cops. When wasn't he in Las Vegas when he supposedly got sick? Was it Las Vegas?
Yes.
When Biden got sick?
Right.
Well, supposedly they flew him to Arizona and put him in a hospice, because the police officers from the police department say they were notified there was a medical emergency and possible death. And so they've come forward and said, hey, that wasn't what happened. He was flown to Arizona. He's not at his house in Delaware. He's at a hospice in Arizona. And again, I don't believe that's actually the real Joe Biden. They've showed us in movies a million times. They use movies, predictive programming, that body doubles. Remember all the ones that came out in the 90s? We had like Dave, and I forget the different movies that were all based on someone coming in and replacing it. They even did one called Moon Over Parador with Richard Dreyfuss, where he was the leader of a South American country. And they flew an actor impersonator in. And he had to be, and they forced him to be. It's not like the guy wanted. He was under a gun, and he was being held hostage. So these things aren't new. I don't know if you remember when George Bush Sr. went on Johnny Carson, and he was talking to the woman in a mask, and it ended up being another person that had one of those rubber masks. So they were telling us when George Bush Sr. was president, they had this technology. So that was 50 years ago, 40 years ago now.
And never forget, it was George Bush Sr. who first said in one of his addresses to the nation about ushering in the New World Order.
Yes. And that's what he put in place to do. It would have happened sooner. But he tried to assassinate Ronald Reagan a bunch of different times. That's well documented. And because they were going to put him. And this is one of my concerns about Vance. He hated Trump for the last 4 years, ran on hating Trump, right? But he went to school on the Paul and Daisy Soros grant. So they're communists, right? And so
did Vivek Ramaswamy, same story,
Vivek
right?
Ramaswamy went to law school on that grant. Yeah. They're both members of Phi Beta Kappa, which is the oldest sorority, and that if you're a member of this sorority, you are highly likely to be at least run for president or more likely be president. I think Trump was one. Oh yeah, fraternity, not sorority. Yeah, a fraternity. So you're more likely to be president if you're from that fraternity. Donald Trump is one of the few presidents who weren't part of it. It's an old Wall Street fraternity, and then there's one that goes the other way, Phi Beta, Kappa Beta Phi, and they're mirroring each other. So you don't really personally, like, how did they know in college he was going to be the next president? And he also has a lot of context to BlackRock and Peter Thiel. So I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt, but I don't know why Trump picked him. Maybe he's got a baby face, and I don't know exactly, but someone who spent the last 4 years before the election bad-mouthing you and putting you down may not be the best person. And I guess my point is they put in, when Reagan came into office, they put in Bush because they were going to try to kill Reagan and put Bush in because
they did not like each other.
No. And then they did the same
respect
thing.
Each other.
They put LBJ in as his vice president, which was an inside party thing. They stuck him in because they knew they were going to kill Kennedy, and put LBJ in, who put all the stuff in that was being, and then shortly thereafter, because Kennedy was against the Federal Reserve private European banking system, and then they put Nixon in. He went off the gold standard, and I believe Nixon was also forcibly pushed out, possibly for some blackmail and things that had happened, things he'd done in Germany with younger girls or something like that. I've seen stories that they held that over him. And a lot of people don't realize that Hillary Clinton was on the Watergate committee, and she was actually removed for lying so many times. And of course, the guy, that was the story for 40 years. But when she ran for president, that guy retracted what he'd said about it. But yeah, I think there's just so many different things that are going on right now.
It is hard to so overwhelming.
I know.
That song I played at the beginning of the show just keeps running through my head. Liar, cheats, and crooks. It just keeps, and we're done. We're sick. We're sick of it. But unless we come together in huge numbers and actually stand up to it, we're lambs being led to slaughter. So
well, a lot of people just think, oh, Donald Trump's going to come into office and everything's going to be better. We are in our country. The things that are going on in our country were set up 100 years ago. The bankers control our country. So all of the reasons we're in all these wars. In 1999, our country went bankrupt, and our politicians never told us. And a few years ago, the private corporation that owns the Federal Reserve banks also went bankrupt. That's what happened the day the world locked down for COVID. The Bank of England, who controls all the Federal Reserve banks in the world, went bankrupt. You can go look it up. They announced it in the Financial Times, the Bank of England. And that's why all the trains stopped, the planes stopped. There was no travel. There was because we live in the Admiralty law system, and the system that we live in collapsed. So since that time, we've been run by a rogue government, and on COVID, that banking institution that controlled, you can go right now and look, American banks have zero reserves. You can go to the FDIC and see that they're insuring like $30 trillion or something insane. I mean, I don't even know if there's that much money in circulation. But
right.
Go to the FDIC and see how much they've got. They've got like $1.5 billion, and that's the last time I looked. That's going to be wiped out about the bank failures that are happening in the next month around the United States. They're just not reporting it in the news. So we have much bigger problems. We need to have a new constitutional convention. We need to put a new constitution in place, and we need to elect. That's why Donald Trump never took money, and none of his family ever took money, because they were taking money from a foreign nation's government. Correct? Because the Federal Reserve is owned by the Rothschild banking family and owned by the Vatican, right? So that's why they didn't take any money from it.
Oh my goodness. I never put that together. I thought he was just doing the noble thing of not taking a salary, but there was a reason behind
and maybe they weren't going to pay him, right? Because it's a private corporation. They could just say, go fly away. A lot of people who weren't getting paid would leave the job. So maybe they weren't paying him. I don't know what the exact story is, but honestly, there was some private citizens in the United States, not politicians, not anything. They stepped in and saved our flag, because according our presidents are part of a lot of our presidents, like Bill Clinton. The reason he was a Cecil Rhodes Scholar, Cecil Rhodes is a British guy who went down to Africa, murdered everybody, and took their stuff. And his dream was to bring the whole world under the British crown. And he left all of his money to bring the countries that had left the British crown, like the United States, back under that umbrella. So that's what the Rhodes Scholarship is, to collapse America. That's the basis. And we got Buttigieg, we've got all these people that are Rhodes Scholars. Their goal is to collapse the United States and implement the British system and bring us back into the British Empire. And that's well documented. You can go look at that. You can look up the guy. I've listened to probably 150 hours. But what's super amazing, my sister recently had a guest over for dinner, and he started listening to my podcast, and he came back the next day. He goes, "Hey, do you know this so-and-so?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "We were just out playing pool with him and his girlfriend last week. My friend lives in Arizona near where this guy lives." And so I'm trying to arrange a meeting to actually interview him and ask him all of these questions. He's got all the documents. They literally saved America. Our flag was open for capture. So that meant that the British were going to try to this, like a lot what happened after the Revolutionary War. The Benjamin Franklin post office was closed, and that was basically our post as us, a part of the international monetary system, right? People say, "Oh, that's not true. That's not true." If you're married in California, you're married in Russia, correct? So we're all in the same legal system, even though we think we're all in different ones.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So they came in and they captured our flag. And they saved the United States. They re-registered us with the United Nations. If you notice, a lot of the flags used by our last few presidents have more stripes or less stripes. They're not actually the US flag. So people can do their own research on that. But so what happened a few years ago, the day the world locked down for COVID, the Federal Reserve banking system went bankrupt in all over the world. And that's why they have all these wars. And you're asking why they're doing all this foreign aid. If they weren't printing all this money, our banks would be non-liquid. 90% of the money that gets printed for war and foreign aid stays in the United States, either to buy food, to buy supplies, and to buy all the military equipment. And even Linesky said, "Look, we're only getting 10% of the money. We need more." Because all the money is staying in our banks. That's why they're so desperate to keep printing this money, because they want to delay it till someone new's in office. They don't want the collapse to happen while the Democrats are in office.
Certainly not. No, certainly not.
Kennedy or Trump.
Yeah, if they can time it to where when and if, Lord willing, please, President Trump wins and becomes president number 47.
Well, I think
that's when they're going to time it all to where it all just falls to hell. And they'll blame it all on him. Wow, look at you stupid people. You voted for a Republican. Well, that's what you get. Enjoy your depression all across the world that Trump caused. That's exactly what they're going to be saying.
If you understand economics and trends, I believe we're going to be in a recession or economic recession for the next 7 years. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be exactly like when was the last time we changed our financial system? In the early 70s. We had a 10-year depression after that. They want to call it a recession, but if anybody who grew up in the 70s, remember, my father was a self-employed person. I remember
oil embargo, all that.
High interest rates, the oil embargo, all that stuff. So we're just, and then you go back in the 30s, the crash happened in 29. The depression didn't start till 32 because it takes people a few years to go through their life savings. People had more savings at that time, and people were more self-reliant. So where are we right now? We're 3 years after COVID. And they can't cover the bank failure up. There's going to be more bank failures this coming week. They're artificially inflating the stock market, because if they don't keep the stock market performing, if you have a life insurance policy, it's going to be gone. If you have all of the different derivatives of derivatives of derivatives we built value on doesn't exist.
Right.
So a lot of people are like, oh, I wish, I have friends, they're like, oh, I wish they'd just get this over with. Let's just get the crash and then we'll do it. I'm like, you don't understand. People just don't grasp how massive it's going to be and how it's going to affect us for generations to come. My grandmother still talked the Depression once a week, and when she was 93, because it impacted her life so greatly. And what did we have in the 70s when they took us off the gold standard? We had massive inflation. We had low home ownership. We had all the men coming back from war. We had all the heroin and drugs being shipped in on our own airplanes to subdue our society while they made all these dramatic changes. Why do you think in that? I think those people did an awesome clip. Why do you think they're pumping all these drugs into our society? Why do you think there's a liquor store on every corner? So we're distracted. And so we're not paying attention. And a good part of the population is. And it is.
Do you know how little fentanyl it takes to kill a human being?
Crazy.
How much has been brought into this country now from China for the most part? How much has been brought in through our open southern and northern borders?
Yeah, but who controls China?
Where is all that? Where is all that?
Controls China?
Where's it being stored? What are they going to do with that? What's the plan for that? Why would you have to bring in so much when it doesn't take that much to get the job done to give somebody a high and just a little bit more to kill them? It doesn't take that much. And they don't even have a count, an idea of how much is in this nation now. Who controls China?
Who controls China? The same people who control us, the Federal Reserve banking system. It took them 100 years to kill off everybody in China. The reason China's sending, if you listen to Mao Xi Jinping or any of the leaders in China right now, the British didn't want to pay for the silk and stuff from the Orient. The Chinese closed their markets off because they saw what the British had done to Europe by getting them in debt, taking over their governments, and putting in their people. So the Chinese didn't want any of that. So the British caused the Opium War 1 and 2, enslaved their entire society, addicted half the population to opium. And when you listen to Chinese leader, they just say they're returning the favor because our leaders, the relatives of the people that are in power now, were the same. And what did they do? Communism was brought to China by George Bush Sr.'s cousin and the Yale in China, right? When the opium wars were over, they forced the Chinese government to take the British banking system. So Rothschild went down. You can go, HSBC was formed by the British, and they controlled all the money from the Chinese banking system. They financed the communists. How did Karl Marx teachings get to China in a closed society?
Great question.
Right?
Great question.
Because it was brought there by Yale in China. The Bush family financed the Nazi party, financed the Bolsheviks, and their sons were put in power to keep the power system in place. So you could go look up the Five Star Trust. You can look up Union Bank. They openly say Wall Street and the City of London financed the Bolsheviks and financed the Nazis, and they financed us to fight them. So not only did they achieve their goal of implementing these systems around the world, they murdered tens of millions of people because they're eugenicists. And the more people that are on the planet, the more people there are to control. So if there's less of us and they are openly killing you off if you don't consent to their system, they're going to get a lot more people that consent to the system, just like China and Russia have lived under for the last 75 to 100
It's all
years.
ultimately the devil's goal to make you take that mark, and you're screwed. You're not going to be able to buy or sell or do anything unless you take that mark, the mark of the beast. I mean, let's go back to that. I mean, ultimately, every single one of this bit of wickedness that you've talked about and you've named names and so on are all basically doing the devil's work, their father's work, just as quickly as possible, for his time is short. So the biggest thing, if I can leave you with anything, because we've talked about a lot of freaking depressing stuff, if I can leave you with anything to where you don't get so discouraged, you just want to lock yourself in a cave, don't forget the power of the Lord. And the Lord
Well,
did promise that He will heal our land if we confess our sins, we come to Him, and we rely on Him, and we take seriously the offer of salvation through His Son Christ Jesus.
and you
Please, I beg you,
understand
if you haven't done that, I beg you to please pray about that, and please ask the Lord to protect you and your family and all of us against this wickedness, to make us ready for what's coming, prepare us, give us wisdom. Jesus told us to pray for wisdom and discernment so we know what's of the devil and what's of the Lord. So we're not easily fooled and duped. Pray for discernment. Beg the Lord for that. You have not because you ask not. So start asking for that wisdom and discernment. Paul told us to pray for the gift of prophecy. I'm like, oh, I don't know if I want that, but all right. I pray for that too. I'm serious. I don't know if I want, but I pray for it. I ask for it because you have not, because you ask not. So ask, start asking. Please take it to the Lord because He will give you a peace beyond all understanding. He promises us that, and I know it now. I thank you, Father, for your Holy Spirit. Thank you for that peace beyond all understanding that you promise to all who love you and are called according to your purpose. In your name, King Yeshua, Christ Jesus, amen and amen. And protect Simone. Please protect Simone and her family and her property. Please protect her, lift her up, keep her strong. She's such a brilliant woman, and I just enjoy her so much. And I ask you to please bless her, help her, protect her in your name, King Jesus. Amen and amen.
Oh, thank you. That was beautiful. We all need that. Yeah.
I know, including me, because this is
Well,
some
I
hard
think
stuff to
that,
talk about, man.
I think that the fact that we're talking about it is showing us that God is working in our lives. And the truth is that God's power is and still in His people. Because how did I meet you? Through Tiffany, right? And so we were on the same page. And then she introduced me to you. And now I'm doing another show. And so it is happening. And I know, especially if you were a podcaster 5 or 7 years ago, it's been super frustrating, but I see people's minds changing every day. And sometimes it's just, you never know what bit of information can affect people to get them thinking. It could be something that you wouldn't even think about. So that's why a lot of times I just kind of just go randomly and talk on topics. I'm hoping that some of the topics will click with somebody and it will encourage them to sit down on their computer after they listen to us and actually delve into the deep rabbit hole. If they could just do one of the 25 things we talked about today, it's going to make things a lot clearer. Everybody's so confused, but when you stop, they want us confused and they want us fearful. That's our power. But here we are today. You and I are doing just fine. And we've sat here for hours talking about what we believe, what we feel, the God we believe in. And every people are waking up. And that's what's going on right now. That's what makes it exciting. Even though we're talking about all this crazy stuff, it's making people think. And I'm worried that a lot of people are just going to say, oh, Trump's going to be president and we're not going to have to do anything. We're in the battle between good and evil. And you can fight
And
on
He'll
the
fix it. Don't turn.
evil side.
Absolutely. Simone Anderson, how
I
do we
got a little
find you? How do
delay
we watch
there.
you? How do we follow you and what you do?
Okay, well, I'm on Agenda 21 Radio on Rumble every Tuesday morning at 8 o'clock with Paul Preston and New California. And I talk on a lot of diverse historical
Stuff.
topics. Sorry, I couldn't get the word out there.
Stuff.
My email address is SimoneMAnderson@AOL.com. I also have a podcast called Lost in Translation, where I explore history to help people understand what's happening to them today. I explore the Vatican political system, the financial system. My focus is a lot on the financial system because I like to follow the money. And I believe that if people understand the true system that we live in, it's going to help them embrace new concepts and think of new ways to make our system better and make our society better, because there's so many people who want that. I don't believe that Satan has as many people he believes under his control as we think he does. It's just people in our view that we see on TV and in the music industry.
They're
but
all
there's really
enjoyable. They're all
billions.
on board.
Yes,
Yeah, they're on the devil cruise to hell.
that's true.
Woohoo! Party. For now, I appreciate you so much. You're so dang fun. Thank you very much, Simone.
All right, Charlie. Thank you for having me. I enjoy listening to your shows too. I'll have to have you come on my show. I'm not very busy on it right now, but starting in September, I'll have a few people on. So I'd
Busy.
love to
I'd
hear
love
your
it.
story. Yeah.
I'd love that. All right, my
All right.
friend. I am Charlie Simons. You want to help the show grow? You can do it through venmo.com/do not talk, and just contribute whatever you can there. It'll really help, especially with some things coming up. I desperately need to invest in a better computer. Desperately, because there's a lot of glitchy, freezy stuff going on right now. It's only getting worse, unfortunately. So venmo.com/do not talk. And may God bless you and keep you. Seriously. And may God bless America. But most importantly, America bless God.